organization. Knight's empire started shaking. Phones rang across the city. People panicked. But Carlos knew what would follow: retaliation. At dawn, while he packed to move again, he heard a sound at the door, a soft knock. He froze. Reached for the small pistol under his pillow. Another knock. Slow. Calm. Deliberate. Then a voice. "Carlos, it's Tari. We need to talk." Carlos' jaw clenched. The air felt thick with memories of laughter, betrayal, and blood. He walked slowly to the door, his heart pounding. Behind the door was the man who had destroyed his life, and the only person who could help him end the war. Carlos stood frozen before the door. Tari's voice still echoed in his head, soft and familiar, the same voice that once laughed with him through sleepless nights. He kept his hand on the pistol, his breathing slow. "Carlos," Tari said again, "please. I'm not here to fight. I just want to talk." Silence. Then, slowly, Carlos opened the door. Tari stood there in a black hoodie, drenched in sweat. His eyes were tired, his face worn out, like someone who hadn't slept for days. Carlos stepped aside, gun still pointed. "Talk." Tari hesitated. His eyes darted around the small room, the half-packed bag, the files on the table, the loaded pistol on the bed. He swallowed hard. "They know everything, Carlos. The leak, the recordings. They know it was you." Carlos didn't move. "And you came here to tell me that? Out of guilt?" Tari's voice cracked. "Out of loyalty. You were right, they used me. Desmond's death wasn't even my doing. They killed him before I could warn him. And now Knight wants me dead too." Carlos studied him. He wanted to believe, but trust was a currency he no longer had. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I brought you this." Tari reached into his jacket slowly and pulled out a small flash drive. "It has everything: Knight's communication with top politicians, payment routes, evidence of the murders. Enough to burn them down." Carlos took it, his hand trembling. "And what do you want in return?" Tari sighed. "A chance to live. That's all." For a long moment, the room was silent except for the sound of distant thunder. Then Carlos lowered his gun. "If you're lying, Tari, I'll make sure you don't die fast." "I know," Tari whispered. They sat together for the first time in months, two broken brothers, tied by blood, betrayal, and survival. Outside, the rain began to fall again, slow and steady, like the city was washing its sins away. By morning, the city was in chaos. The leak Carlos had triggered was spreading like wildfire. Major media outlets were reporting strange financial movements among top oil executives. Names of politicians started popping up. And at the center of it all, Knight. The Brotherhood had gone silent. They were regrouping. Carlos knew the silence was a storm waiting to break. He and Tari moved between safe houses, using fake IDs. But the walls were closing in. At a small cafe in D-Line, Tari stared at the crowd nervously. "We can't stay here forever. Knight has men everywhere." Carlos didn't respond. He was watching a news headline on the small TV above the counter. "Breaking, Black ex-financier under investigation." His plan was working, but too well. Now the police were after everyone, including him. That night, they went to meet Chief Boma again, hoping for an escape route. But when they got to his mansion, the gate was open. Too open. Carlos' instincts screamed. He stopped Tari. "Something's wrong. Stay here." He stepped inside slowly, gun raised. The smell hit him first: iron and smoke. Then he saw them. Chief Boma's guards, dead. Boma himself, slumped in his chair, bullet hole in his chest. A single paper lay on the table. Carlos picked it up. It read, "This is what happens when you play with shadows." He knew who sent it. Knight. Tari's voice shook from behind him. "Carlos, we need to go." Carlos clenched his jaw. His hands were trembling, not with fear, but fury. "No," he said slowly. "We finish this tonight." Carlos spent the next few hours gathering every file, every photo, every recording he could find. He uploaded them to multiple drives, hidden in different locations. If he died, the world would still know the truth. At midnight, his phone buzzed. A private number. He answered. "Carlos," a deep voice said, calm and commanding. It was Knight. "You've caused me too much trouble. Let's end this like men." Carlos laughed coldly. "Men? You don't kill like a man, Knight. You hide behind fear." "Come to the docks," Knight replied. "Alone. Let's finish what Desmond started." The line went dead. Tari shook his head. "It's a trap." "I know," Carlos said, loading his pistol. "But it's one I'm ready for." He walked to the window and stared out at the city lights, his city. The place that gave him everything and took everything away. "You ever wonder if we could have lived a simple life?" Tari asked quietly. Carlos smiled sadly. "Simple lives are for people the city never noticed." They left before dawn. The docks were quiet, the air thick with mist. Carlos walked ahead while Tari stayed behind, scanning the shadows. Then, from the darkness, headlights flashed. 3 black SUVs rolled in. Men stepped out armed, silent, and precise. And from the middle car, Knight emerged. Tall. Clean. Sharp-eyed. He smiled faintly. "I heard you're good with words, Carlos. Let's see if words can save you now." Carlos stood his ground. "I didn't come to beg. I came to end this." Knight laughed softly. "You really think you can stop us? You're just one man." "One man," Carlos said quietly, "is all it takes to set a city on fire." And then the first shot rang out. The first gunshot echoed across the cold river air. Carlos dug behind a stack of old oil drums as bullets ripped through the night. Sparks flew. Glass shattered. The dock turned into chaos. Knight's men spread out, their boots pounding against wet concrete. Carlos returned fire, short, controlled bursts hitting one man in the shoulder, another in the leg. But they kept coming. Tari shouted from behind a container. "Carlos! They're everywhere! Stay low!" Carlos yelled back, reloading quickly. The air smelled of gunpowder and saltwater. The river churned violently under the glow of distant oil flames. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. Carlos peeked from cover. The gunfire had stopped. Only the sound of the river remained. He stood, cautiously, pistol raised. And there, in the open, stood Knight. Calm. Unbothered. His men had formed a half-circle around him. Knight clapped slowly, mocking. "Impressive. You've survived longer than I expected." Carlos stepped forward, blood on his arm, eyes locked on him. "Why did you kill Desmond?" Knight smirked. "Because he forgot who made him powerful. He thought he could leave." "No one leaves." "And Tari?" Carlos asked, his voice shaking. Knight chuckled. "Ah, your loyal brother. The one who gave us your safe house? He's been useful." Carlos turned sharply toward Tari, who froze, caught between shame and fear. "Carlos, I didn't." "Don't lie to me." Carlos shouted, his voice breaking. "You brought them here." Tari's eyes filled with tears. "I had no choice. They promised." But he didn't finish. A gunshot cracked through the air, sharp and final. Tari fell. Knight lowered his pistol slowly. No more distractions. Carlos' scream tore through the silence. He rushed to Tari's side, holding him as his blood spread across the dock. Tari coughed weakly. I tried to fix it, bro." Then he went still. Carlos' tears mixed with the rain as he looked up at Knight. You just made your last mistake. He grabbed Tari's fallen weapon, fired wildly, and ran toward the warehouse by the river. The hunt began again. The warehouse was old, abandoned, filled with containers, ropes, and rusted tools. Carlos moved silently, every step echoing in the dark. Knight's men followed, careful, methodical. He knew he couldn't fight them all. He needed to outsmart them. He climbed onto a steel platform above the main floor and waited. When the first two men entered, he threw a metal pipe onto the far side. They turned toward the sound, and Carlos dropped down behind them, striking fast. One fell instantly. The other fired blindly, bullets ricocheting off metal walls. Carlos rolled behind a crate, breathing hard. His arm burned from a graze. Then he heard Knight's voice again. You can't hide forever, Carlos. The city doesn't belong to you. Maybe not, Carlos shouted back, but it won't belong to you either. He pulled a small remote from his pocket. It was connected to explosives he had planted earlier on the dock, old industrial gas tanks he'd rigged using Boma's materials. Knight laughed. You won't do it. You'll die too. Carlos looked down at Tari's blood still on his shirt. Then we both die. He pressed the button. The explosion tore through the docks like thunder. Flames erupted, lighting up the river in orange and red. The shockwave threw Carlos across the floor. He hit a metal beam, his vision spinning. Knight's men screamed. Some ran toward the burning pier, others collapsed. The warehouse shook violently. Through the smoke, Carlos saw Knight stumbling, his clothes scorched, his face twisted in fury. They locked eyes one last time. Knight raised his gun. Carlos raised his too. 2 shots. Then silence. Both men fell. When Carlos opened his eyes, he was lying on the cold concrete floor. The fire was dying down outside. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. His body ached everywhere. He tried to move, pain shot through his chest. Next to him, Knight was sprawled, lifeless, eyes open, unmoving. Carlos let out a shaky laugh, half in pain, half in disbelief. We did it, Tari, we finally did it. He dragged himself to the edge of the dock. The river glowed faintly under the dying flames, the same river that had taken his father years ago. He could hear police sirens getting closer. He knew what was coming: arrests, trials, maybe death. But for the first time in his life, Carlos felt free. He pulled the small flash drive from his pocket, the one Tari gave him. He tossed it into the river. Let the truth drown with me, he whispered. Then he smiled faintly, whispering through the blood on his lips. Waterfront boy to the end. As he closed his eyes, the police lights flickered over his face. The boy who rose from nothing had finally fallen, not as a victim, but as a man who refused to be owned. And as the city woke to another dawn, whispers spread again through Port Harcourt. Did you hear? Carlos is gone. That boy from Waterfront? He almost brought the Brotherhood down. And in the quiet corners of the city, where ambition still burns and greed still breathes, his name became a warning. Never bite the hand that feeds from the shadows. The sky was thick with smoke. Police cordons lined the waterfront as investigators took pictures of charred metal, broken glass, and human remains. They found 2 bodies, one identified as Knight, the other, barely recognizable. The report said unidentified male, but everyone in the underworld already knew. Carlos was dead. The news spread fast, from nightclubs to warehouses, from the creeks to the mansions. Some people celebrated. Others whispered in fear. And a few cried quietly in corners where nobody could see. At the hospital, Boma sat with her head bowed. Her hands trembled as she watched Tari's body being moved to the morgue. She couldn't stop the tears. You both deserved better, she whispered. Outside, an old woman selling food near the docks looked up at the sky and muttered. Another child swallowed by this city. For Port Harcourt, it was just another story. For those who knew him, it was the end of an era. 2 weeks passed. Rain fell constantly, washing away the last ashes from the dock. But rumors refused to die. Some said Carlos was still alive, that he escaped before the explosion. Others swore they saw him limping through the creeks that night, bloodied but breathing. Even the police couldn't confirm anything. The body found was burned beyond recognition. Detective Hassan, the officer assigned to the case, looked at the file on his desk. The photographs. The weapons. The blood trail. "This city is a snake," he muttered to his partner. "Cut off one head, another grows." His partner shrugged. "Then let's hope this one stays dead." But Carlos' name wouldn't fade. In every bar, every whisper of street hustlers, his story spread twisted, exaggerated, glorified. Some said he betrayed the Black Axe and survived. Some said he was buried alive. Some said he became a ghost who hunted those who destroyed his friends. But for Boma, the truth was simple. She lost the only man who ever looked at her like she mattered. Every night, she sat by the riverbank with a small candle. She would light it, place it on the water, and whisper, "If you're still out there, Carlos, find peace." The candle always drifted away, swallowed by the dark water. 6 months later. Port Harcourt had moved on. Knight's men were either dead or scattered. The Brotherhood still operated, quieter now, careful. Then one evening, in a dusty mechanic shop on the outskirts of the city, a man walked in. He wore a black hoodie. His face was lined with scars. He walked with a limp. The mechanics stopped working. One of them whispered, "You look familiar, boss." The man smiled faintly. "I used to live by the waterfront." The whole place went silent. Carlos. He was alive. He had escaped the explosion by diving into the river moments before detonation. The current carried him downstream, where local fishermen found him half dead. He had no strength to return until now. Carlos sat quietly in the shop that night, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. "Night is gone," he said softly. "But the rot he planted still grows." He made a decision. He would not return as a criminal. He would return as something stronger, a man who could rebuild what was destroyed. Carlos started small. He opened a small logistics company using his street connections to employ ex-convicts, jobless youth, and even former gang members. He called it Waterfront Movers. His motto, no blood. Only hustle. People laughed at first. But soon, his company became known for its discipline and fairness. He paid his workers on time. He helped their families. The same city that once feared his name now respected it. Even Detective Hassan, who once hunted him, found himself shaking Carlos' hand at a community meeting. "I never thought I'd see you like this," Hassan said. Carlos smiled. "Maybe this city doesn't need another king. Just a man who can build without burning." He meant it. But deep down, he knew peace never lasted long in Port Harcourt. One rainy night, Carlos stood by the river again, the same spot where everything began. He dropped a single white flower into the water. "For Tari. For Boma. For everyone I failed." Behind him, the sound of car tires splashing through puddles echoed. A group of young men approached, wearing cheap jackets and hungry eyes. "Sir, we want to join you," one said. "We're tired of the Brotherhood. We want something different." Carlos looked at them, saw himself in their faces. He nodded slowly. "Then you'll work. No guns, no blood. Just work." The boys nodded eagerly. As they left, Boma stepped out from the shadows. Her eyes were tired but warm. "You really came back from the dead." Carlos smiled faintly. "Maybe I had to die first to learn how to live." She walked closer and took his hand. The city lights reflected off the water, calm and golden. "So what now?" she asked. Carlos looked at the horizon where oil flames danced like stars. "Now, we build a new story. One that doesn't end in blood." He turned and walked away slowly, hand in hand with Boma, as the rain fell gently over the city that once swallowed him whole. And from that day on, the whispers changed. Carlos isn't the man who fell. He's the man who rose again. Because in Port Harcourt, where loyalty is rare and peace is fragile, legends never die, they just learn to start again. In the heart of Port Harcourt, where loyalty bleeds and dreams drown in the river, one man dared to rise again. Cloud with rain. Carlos was more than a name. He was a story of pain, redemption, and the price of power. He lost everything that made him strong, only to find what made him human. And maybe that's what life truly is. Not about how high we climb, but about how many times we choose to stand up again, even after the fall. Thought balloon, because in every city, in every soul, there's a Carlos fighting to start over. This has been another unforgettable story from Nightfall Tales by Wura, where emotions meet storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere in the next story, another legend is waiting to rise.